1,400 people online.
Oh, nice. Okay. Did everybody hear that? Apparently, we have 1,400 people watching online at this point, which will only get bigger as the evening goes on. I think we had over 20,000 last year by the time it was. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Whitefish Point and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. My name is Bruce Lynn. I'm the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society. Before we start, I would like to welcome everybody tonight, everybody who was able to make the drive and be with us tonight here at our main museum gallery here at Whitefish Point. And in particular, I'd like to welcome our Edmund Fitzgerald families that are with us. I feel like we have a few layers of families here. We have some new faces that I've not seen coming to this event before, which is great. We have some faces that we haven't seen for a few years, and that's wonderful to have them back as well. And then, of course, we have Fitzgerald family members who've been coming back year after year. And I think I mentioned it last year. It's almost like a family reunion in a lot of ways when all of us are able to get together. Seems like these years are passing unfortunately too quickly, because it seems like it wasn't that long ago that we just had the last event to remember the ship and crew. But with that, welcome back to all of our Fitzgerald family members. I'd also like to say thank you and welcome to our Coast Guard crew that could be with us here tonight. In particular, Chief Kyle Rice, who I think, Kyle, this is your last year that you'll be with us. Yes, which doesn't make us happy here at the museum. Kyle's helped in a lot of different ways. I'll expound on that a little bit more as well. We'd also like to welcome the Great Lakes Maritime Academy and the cadets that are with us here tonight. They've helped us to make this event work over the years as well. And last but not least, the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute, Mike Forns and Kathy as well. And Kathy, I'm losing your last name, Asseltine? Asseltine, there we go. It just came back to me. Let's give them a round of applause, by the way. You know, Mike has helped us with a lot of different projects over the years. And so it's another familiar face. And Kathy, welcome aboard too. We're glad that you could join us here tonight. So when I think about the preparation that we have for this memorial each year, it's hard for me not to think a little bit about what a certain aspect of what we do at the Shipwreck Museum that most people don't know about. And that would be our time out on Lake Superior, primarily looking for shipwrecks. We have a small U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, older 1980s era research vessel, and we tow sonar behind it, and we look for shipwrecks. Doesn't mean we always find shipwrecks when we go out, but when we do, one aspect of what we do to help ourselves and really help us to better understand these wrecks that we're seeing is that we learn the stories of these wrecks. And when I think about this memorial that we have every year, it's hard for me not to think about those shipwreck stories that are just right on our back doorstep that go right along with it. I think many of you are probably familiar. There's about 200 shipwrecks roughly just in this area alone between Whitefish Bay and going about 80 miles to the west to the area of the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. And so many of those shipwrecks have stories that are really tragic in many ways, and in other ways they're miraculous in the ways that at times crewmen would survive some of these shipwrecks. So when I think about what we do each year here, it's hard for me again not to reflect on some of those other stories of shipwreck that are right on our back doorstep. Because if you think about it, think about our family members that we have here today. Think of each one of those other wrecks. They all had families, and so we try to remember those crews, those different shipwrecks, and we do that every year when we ring the bell a 30th time for all mariners lost on the Great Lakes. Now, Each year we do this also. We try to bring a different aspect of the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald and her crew, bring it to light. If many of you who were with us in 2021 remember a gentleman by the name of Bob Baxter who joined us. He was a first engineer on board the old LE block, and they just happened to be in Whitefish Bay on the night of November the 10th, 1975. And just even 2 years ago, we had a gentleman by the name of George Bratz, who was with the Toledo Blade. He was a newspaper man, he was a reporter, and he had the great idea of maybe telling the world, or at least telling the readers of the Toledo Blade, what it was like to work and live on a freighter operating in the Great Lakes. So in 1974, he got his wish, and the ship that he just happened to be on would have been the Edmund Fitzgerald. So he got to know a lot of the crew at that time. And then last year, many of you will recall that we had Mike talking about Gordon Lightfoot and the writing of the song, and how important that has been to keeping this story of the ship and crew alive over the years. You know, it's not a day goes by here at Whitefish Point at the museum when people come in and they're asking us questions, asking our interpretive staff questions about the Edmund Fitzgerald itself. Now, are they asking questions about the Daniel J. Morrell? Not necessarily. Are they asking questions about the whaleback barge 129? No, they're not asking questions about that either. Or are they asking questions about the Carl D. Bradley? Some of them might, but by and large, they're not, because a famous Canadian folk singer didn't write a song about those shipwrecks. So it helps us, again, to tell some of those other stories that are out there. But at the same time, if there is one shipwreck that people want to know about, it is the Edmund Fitzgerald. And that is what we're remembering tonight, the Fitzgerald, and most importantly, that crew of 29. So with that thought in mind, we typically would have Father Bob Aldridge from St. James Episcopal Church, who would be doing the invocation, but Bob's having some health challenges at this point. So Bob did share the invocation with us, and Mike Forns will be reading it for us tonight. Mike.
We bow our heads. Almighty God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home, who made the mighty waters deep, their appointed limits keep, and whose arm has calmed the restless wave. Hear us when we call to thee for those who rest in Superior's inland sea. We ask your blessing on us as we gather this night to recall and honor the merchant mariners serving upon the SS Edmund Fitzgerald at the time of her fateful voyage, and who have been committed to the deep of Lake Superior. We ask that you receive our prayers on behalf of the souls of your servants who are now in the fellowship of your saints. We further ask your blessings upon those who offer this tribute in honor of those for whom the bell tolls, O Lord God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Thank you, Mike. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, each year we have a different speaker come in to speak to some aspect of the story of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And that could be anything from sailors around the lake that night to, in some cases, people that are researching and learning more about this story to further illuminate certain aspects of the history of the Edmund Fitzgerald and her crew. That is exactly what our speaker tonight, John U. Bacon, who is a researcher, he's an author, he's a historian. He's written over 12 books at this point, and he has 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. And he has been working with a number of the Edmund Fitzgerald family members to learn a little bit more of the story of their loved one. So with that, I'm going to introduce John U. Bacon. I will say too, as John's walking up, I got to know John on Michigan radio because he would talk a lot about Michigan football. And I'm a Buckeye, so I always saw that as a little bit of propaganda, but John's a great guy. I'll turn the mic over to John. Thank you.
Probably right down.
Short guy, this works out just fine. So there we go. Thank you very much, Bruce. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. I cannot tell you what a great honor it is for me to be here. I've been here 3 times now for this event. I've heard some great speeches, of course, and every time this event gets to me, and it's getting to me more each time as I learn more about the families and the men on the ships. We'll get right into it. Bruce, big thank to Bruce. He obviously does a great job here at the museum. He's also, by the way, a fantastic writer. His book, The Legend Lives On, I think is the best out there, with the great photographer, Christopher Winters, helping him with the photos as well. It's a wonderful book. So he introduced me to Pam Wittig, the cousin of Bruce Hudson, Deb Champeau, the daughter of Buck Champeau. You see him up there, of course. Heidi Braben, the daughter of Blaine Wilhelm, the oiler on the ship. That has also been a wonderful honor for me that they have trusted me with their stories. And the title of my book is going to be The Gales of November. There's already a book out there called Gales of November. Trust me when I tell you, you're trying to title one of these books, they've all been taken many times because the song is that good and the lyrics end up on all kinds of books naturally. But the subtitle is more important to me. The Gales of November, the untold story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. What can you possibly tell about the story that has not been told in 20 previous books at least? It's not a small task, but the answer is the people. The technical parts of it are in the book, of course, and we talk about that and what happened that night. Most of the books are trying to solve the mystery. And as Aunt Ruth herself, Aunt Ruth Hudson said, only 30 people actually know what happened. 29 men on the ship and God. And after that, we're all pretty much guessing, and that has to be understood. What is the book about? To tell the story of these men, I wanted to back up and tell the story of the Great Lakes, why it's such a big deal, why shipping is so important, what their lives are actually like, and their families at home, what they have to go through to support this lifestyle. So the Great Lakes themselves, one of the challenges, not for you, but for my other readers, is trying to explain just how incredible the Great Lakes are. If you try to explain to somebody in New York or LA, they have no idea. And a quick story about this, when Guy Meadows at Michigan Tech University, a researcher, was trying to get funding for a research ship to study Lake Superior, he was in DC talking to one of the politicians who explained to him, you have to understand, these ships need enough space to turn around. And I'm not sure if the Great Lakes can do that. So at that point, there's no point trying to explain, obviously, but a better writer than I by far, Alexis de Tocqueville, who came here 200 years ago from France, wrote a great book, Democracy in America. He wrote this in a letter to one of his friends. This lake without sails, this shore which does not yet show any trace of the passage of man, this eternal forest which borders it all that, I assure you, is not grand in poetry only. It is the most extraordinary spectacle that I've ever seen in my life. This is a man who traveled throughout Europe and North America, and this, the Great Lakes, the most magnificent thing he ever saw. And I'll add, he was talking about Lake Erie. And I'm no lake snob by any means. Lake Erie is a beautiful lake, obviously an important part of our story. But if that blew his mind, I can only imagine what Lake Superior would do to that guy. So it's an amazing place. I had no idea until I started my research how dangerous the Great Lakes really are. And in fact, to make a very good case, they're more dangerous than the oceans themselves. And that seems implausible until I explain a few things that I learned about salt water versus fresh water. Salt water weighs the water down, it smooths out the waves, right, and spreads them out. So you get these nice, gentle, rolling roller coasters, which can create their own problems, but not the way that a Great Lakes storm can do it. Because their waves are pointy, the water does not get pushed down by the salt. They're like mountain peaks, and they're twice as close together as ocean waves. So instead of 6 seconds apart, or instead of 12 seconds apart, they're 6 seconds apart. What does that mean? You can have your ship in the bow in one wave, and the stern in another wave at the same time. That creates problems. Some of these wrecks were due to that. Also, by the way, when you talk to people I know who've been on both the ocean and the Great Lakes, John Hayes is here tonight. His best man for his wedding was going to be Tom Benson, an oiler on the ship. John has spent 35 years in the Great Lakes and 12 years on the oceans. He told me, the ocean sailors just laughed at us, but not for long. I'm telling you, it's not even close. Anyone who's sailed on both the ocean and the Great Lakes would tell you the same. Once the salties see it for themselves, they shut up pretty fast, and then they start looking for safe harbor. Right? These lakes are tougher than the oceans. I did not realize that until I started my research. So why do it? Why risk your lives? Why go through this perilous passage again and again and again? These guys did it constantly. John Dillinger, the famous gangster, when he was asked why he robs banks, he explained, that's where the money is. All right. So why do you sail the Great Lakes? That's where the economy demands, basically. We have more great resources on the Great Lakes than any other region in the world. And of course, waterways to carry that, minerals, lumber, beaver pelts. Millions went over to Europe in the 1850s, and everybody was wearing beaver pelted hats in London and Paris from here. On top of that, the lumber, by the way, the lumber barons, all the money, all the miners in the California gold rush, and all the gold they got did not equal the money made from the lumber barons. Lumber in Michigan and the Great Lakes strips it all. Copper, by the way, is 3 times greater. The copper rush of 1844 on, about 100 years, and the Keweenaw mainly, that is 3 times more than the California gold rush. Nobody knows this. All right? That's the power of the Great Lakes. But iron eclipses them all. And to prove that, before the Civil War, a guy in the South, a Confederate leader, said that cotton is king. And for that reason, the North would never try to start a fight with us. If they did, they would lose the war. But it turns out that cotton is not king, iron is. And the iron from the Iron Range that got through Lake Superior, that got through the Sioux locks, because in 1855, the government built those locks for the first time. All right, in the first year it opened, they had 3 million pounds of minerals go through the Sioux locks. All right, in 1861, 5 years later, the first year of the Civil War, it was 240 million pounds, 80 times more. Those are cannons, those are guns, those are bullets, those are cannonballs. That's how they won the war. They did it again, of course, in World War II with the arsenal of democracy. You guys know about that, I'm sure. All right, that was why FDR paid for a new lock, the MacArthur lock in 1943, built in 15 months in Sault Ste. Marie, would allow all those ships to bring all that iron, of course, from Minnesota and elsewhere, down to the Willow Run factory by Ford, where they produced 1 B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, on the hour, all night, all day for 3 straight years. 8,000 bombers. That is the arsenal of democracy. We don't win without the Sioux locks and the iron they carried. And FDR knew that, which is why he stationed 7,000 soldiers in Sault Ste. Marie during World War II. It was the most guarded place in all of North America. That's how important this work is. After World War II, of course, we turn our attention not to the military, but to the economy. And no region on earth was more powerful from 1945 to 1975 than the Great Lakes. In 1957, the top 100 companies in the United States, 37 were attached to Detroit. 37. Number 1 was General Motors. Number 3 was Ford Motor Company. Number 7 was Chrysler. And it goes on like that. And that's why, by the way, at that time, 5 of the largest 12 cities in North America were all on the Great Lakes: Chicago, Toronto, Detroit, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. And get this, in 1960, Toledo, Ohio ranked 39th nationwide. They were ahead of Miami and Tampa, San Jose, Jacksonville, and Nashville. And those 5 cities all have 11 major league teams now. So that's how big Toledo was. So in the 3 decades that followed World War II, this region had all the power and prestige of Silicon Valley today. And we should not forget that. When the Edmund Fitzgerald was riding high from 1958 to 1975, so were the states that she served. But it all depended on shipping. How do you get the iron from Minnesota and Wisconsin and Upper Peninsula to the factories? Trucks, we all think of trucks, we see them every day. Trucks are half as efficient as trains. Trains are twice as efficient as trucks. And shipping is 3 times more efficient than trains. shipping is 6 times more efficient than trucks. So when you see a truck is nothing compared to what these ships can do. That means not 6% more efficient or 60% more efficient, but 600% more efficient. Ships are the way to go. As a professor at Michigan, Matthew Collette, told me, in the history of the world, ships are simply the most efficient means of transportation that man has ever known. And so it is today. So what these men were doing was vital to our security and our economy. And that's why the cement in your basement, by the way, the steel in your car, and the food on your table all comes from Great Lakes shippers. That brings us to the men on these ships and the sacrifices that they made. As John Tanner told me, the former superintendent of the Great Lakes Maritime Academy, well represented here, he said, we know the farmer, we know the factory worker, we know the fisherman, but nobody knows the sailor. And I thought about that, and I thought, why is that? And if you do the math, it kind of makes sense. In the heyday of Great Lakes shipping, when the Fitzgerald was running, there are 300 freighters on the Great Lakes. They only have about 30 men per ship. That's only 900 people total do all this work. That is not even a small village compared to millions of farmers and factory workers. And on top of that, they're never home, so you don't meet them either. They're on the ships 9 months out of the year. They're not in the PTO. They don't join Rotary Club. They don't coach your baseball team. You don't know the guys on these ships usually. So it's quite a sacrifice, of course. So Heidi Breben, who's here tonight, she's the daughter of Blaine Wilhelm, an oiler on the ship. She said, at school, all my friends would ask, where's your dad? And I would say, my dad is on a ship, your dad is on a farm. That's just the way it is. And for these kids, it's an incredible sacrifice also. 9 months out of the year, your father is on a ship away from home. And back then, you could get a phone call once in a while from a doc, and a lot of letters. There were no cell phones, there's no internet. You were pretty much out of touch for most of that time. And as the great Eric Larson wrote a book on Fort Sumter that led up to it, there's a code duello that all these Southern gentlemen followed to make sure that they were as chivalrous as can be. It's a pretty thick book with it all spelled out. There's no code for these sailors, and they're not presumptuous enough to write it down if there was a code, I don't think. It would boil down to basically 4 things. Know your job, do your job, make no excuses, and never quit. And that's what these men and their families did constantly. The stories keep coming back to me again and again about how these men functioned. And the families did so too, as I said, the moms especially. These men were not around to teach the kids how to ride a bike or throw a baseball. The moms and the uncles and the cousins did all those things. And I see, by the way, if you don't believe me, the family members are nodding at all of this. This was their lives. So I talked to John Hayes about this when the season started. John had his photos of his 3 beautiful kids and his wife, and he put them face down on the table. Why? Because it broke his heart too much to see their pictures every day when he knew he would not see them for 6 or 7 more months. So at the last week of the season, he'd flip them back up and see his family again and know he's about to see them again. Tom Walton, his dad and his uncle were both on the Fitz, and Grant Walton was on the Fitzgerald that night. He also served on the Fitzgerald himself in 1963 as a porter, and Tom is still around. He said a great line about this: if you're the child of a sailor, the phrase, wait until your dad gets home, lacks power. He said, because who can possibly remember the sins of 4 kids 9 months later? All right, the odds of you getting off the hook are pretty good. Buddy said, I don't know. He also said, your mom was working not with a calendar, but a clock. Sorry, not a clock, but a calendar, sorry. He said, I don't know how our mom did it, but he said, all 4 of us are high school graduates and nobody's in prison. I think you have to call that success. When Buck Champeau, third engineer on the Fitzgerald, returned from his 9 months on the lakes, he would like to surprise his daughter, Debbie, at her school, St. Pius XI in Milwaukee. Not let her know that he was in town that day, drive up to the school and catch her cleaning the chalkboards. I can only imagine what that reunion must have felt like. And I've got a small sliver in my life because my son Teddy is right back there, little 9-year-old guy who rang the bell last year. I was on the Arthur Anderson this year, and I was gone for 6 days in the summer. We docked in Toledo just the way the Fitzgerald often did. And my wife pulled up to this park, and Teddy hopped out before she had a chance, and he came running at me full blast with no let up whatsoever. And I saw him coming, and I got on my knees, which turned out to stain my khakis for good, but who cares at that point, right? And he gave me the strongest, longest hug of my life. And to this day, I'll get choked up right now thinking about that moment. That was 6 days. That was 6 days that we've been apart, the longest we've ever been apart, 6 days. These men were on this ship for 9 months at a stretch. That's a sacrifice from everybody. But as John Hayes also told me, there's nothing better than coming home from the last trip with a big bonus check in my pocket. My kids would come up and hug me and say, "You smell like a truck." And John would say, "I smell like a paycheck." And that's how we pay for all this stuff. So the Fitz itself, when Edmund Fitzgerald himself, the CEO of Northwestern Mutual Insurance in Milwaukee, when he decided they're going to build a ship, he had one simple goal: to build the greatest ship the Great Lakes had ever seen, and they achieved that goal. The time it started was the longest ship on the Great Lakes. Within the first year, it already set records for the largest load, the fastest runs, and the largest big season hauls, the entire thing. It was a heavyweight, it was a sprinter, and a workhorse all in one. The ship was all that and more. The accommodations in the ship, especially in the stateroom for the VIPs, was the equal of any hotel in America, and the food was better. So the VIPs who hopped on the ship would always write about this. These are often clients and so on. They'd have 2 rooms, the stateroom for the landlubbers like me to hop on. And they always came on their journals. I've got the journals, and these journals are very consistent. And in the journals, they always get on the ship gushing about what an amazing structure this is. 729 feet. It's amazing all the things that it can do. The technology at first blew them away. And by the time they get off that ship, 5 days later, what blew them away was the crew and the service they provided and all the jobs they do on the ship so efficiently every day. They had the best captain on the Great Lakes in Ernest McSorley, and he recruited the best crew on the Great Lakes. And I've talked again to 6 guys who had served on that ship at some point before 1975. And as one of them told me, it was very simple. Captain McSorley had a very strict no jackass policy. All right. And once you have that policy in place, all right, if you know a good guy, then that good guy knows another good guy, and you get him on the ship as well. And there are a couple of examples where somebody did not fit, and that guy was off the ship pretty quickly. So McSorley enforced that. The usual division between the pilot house and the engine room did not exist on the Fitz. That was very common in the 1970s. They got along quite well, and they developed too many friendships to count. These were ordinary men doing extraordinary things. And the men on the ship, the whole point of this background is to underscore a very basic point. The men on this ship were heroes before November 10th, 1975. We were already in their debt. We all know, of course, right around this time, exactly 49 years ago tonight, Captain Cooper of the Anderson radios Captain McSorley of the Fitzgerald, and he asks him, "By the way, Fitzgerald, how are you making out with your problem?" As we all know, Captain McSorley responds, "We are holding our own." Again, part of the code of the Great Lakes sailor. You don't complain. There were also heroes after the fact. After she went down, the Anderson, the William Clay Ford, other ships, and of course the Woodrush, all the way from Duluth, all got out that night in horrible weather, knowing the odds of finding anybody were very slim. But you do it anyway because that is part of the code. Michael Zronic, who spoke here before, talked about this, their commanding officer in the Coast Guard. That night, he said, "Look, we have to go out. We don't have to come back." And that is part of the code, of course, of the Coast Guard as well. The families worked for 20 years afterwards. Aunt Ruth, of course, Ms. Roseman, and others, 20 years to make sure that the site was declared a grave site, a sacred site, untouchable by outsiders. And of course, the bell was resurrected right here. Pretty amazing what they did. And of course, they're not doing this to get their sons and husbands and uncles and cousins back. That's impossible. Trying to make sure that they're remembered with the respect and dignity they so richly deserve. In the process, something beautiful happened. The families who did not even know each other in most cases before that fateful night, they started becoming as close as the men on the ship had become. And year by year, this happens. And as Bruce said before I got up here, I was in, of course, the cruise quarters before this. And this is my third year coming back. It is like a high school reunion when these guys get back. The laughter is everywhere. And these are people from Minnesota and Wisconsin and South Carolina now, Florida, all over. And they bond on this like you can't imagine. And that is a gift I don't know if anybody could have foreseen on that night, that these people are so close now. As Heidi told me a couple of years ago, we've become a family. He said, I don't mean like a family, I mean a family. And Debbie Champeau, when she said that, nodded. And Pam Wittig, also at the table, she said, these are the people you know have got your back. That's how close they are now. One of Heidi's daughters is Sarah Braven. She was born on November 10th, 1998, exactly 23 years after the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We were sitting around that table a couple of years ago. We started talking about this and that. She says, hey, I need to show you something. And with that, on her left sleeve, she pulls up her sweatshirt and shows me a tattoo on the inside of her left forearm. And all it says is, we are holding our own. And so they are. Thank you.
Thank you, John, very much. Very well put. I don't know about the rest of you, but I look forward to reading the book when it comes out. You know, I teased John a little bit about the Michigan football thing. You know, obviously Big Ten football is a big thing this time of the year particularly, but John gave me a copy of his book that he had written about the Halifax explosion, which a great many people in Canada are aware of, but in the United States, it's not quite as well known. It was December 1917. Two ships collided at Halifax Harbor, which resulted in, at the time, the largest man-made explosion in history, with over, if I recall, 1,700 people perishing in that explosion. What impressed me about that book was all of the voices that John was able to bring into that book. Even though this event happened in 1917, it was almost as if you were there hearing the people, even though it was the written word, you were reading their stories and what had happened. So if the next book is half as good, this is going to be fantastic. So thank you again, John. Okay. Our bell, the Edmund Fitzgerald bell, the centerpiece of this museum, it is something that people come to see from all over the country. And people even sometimes try to get into the museum just to try to sneak in almost as we're closing at the end of the day because they just want to see this bell. I had one family member remind me that it was 29 years ago, last July, that this bell broke the surface. And I had another family tell me that Jack Champeau, the brother of Oliver Buck Champeau, was the first person to ring this bell after it broke the surface. Some of you might recall the following day or days after this bell was recovered, there was an event that took place in Sault Ste. Marie. And oddly enough, it was, again, this was July we were talking about, and it was 1995, but that weather, it wasn't a July kind of a day. The skies were dark, the wind was blowing at 20 and 30 miles per hour. It was very cold. It was a very, very dramatic day when that bell, at least for what we are about to do after the bell had been brought up. It looked a little bit different then than it does now, but some of you might recall what that day was like, and it was pretty dramatic. So with that, I'm going to reintroduce Senior Chief Kyle Rice. Kyle, unfortunately, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, this is the last year that he's going to be reading the call to the last watch before he goes on to his next station. Kyle has helped us tremendously up here, even a series of dedications we had this year for a couple of long-term historic preservation projects in the form of a 1923 U.S. Coast Guard motor lifeboat house and a 1930s era motor lifeboat to go along with it. And Kyle and some of his crew came up and helped us with that. It was much appreciated. So, Kyle. Okay, there we go.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting myself and my crew here this evening. It really hits home to a lot of us. So there's a lot of local Coast Guard members that grew up in this area, and Whitefish Point, Edmund Fitzgerald. This is all very meaningful to us. With that, Ernest M. McSorley, Captain. John H. McCarthy, First Mate. James A. Pratt, Second Mate. Michael E. Armagast, Third Mate. John D. Simmons, Wheelsman. Eugene W. O'Brien, Wheelsman. John J. Poviak, Wheelsman. Thomas D. Bergeson, Maintenance. Ransom E. Cundy, Watchman. William J. Spengler, Watchman. Bruce L. Hudson, Maintenance. David E. Weiss, Cadet. Robert C. Rafferty, Steward. Alan G. Coleman, Second Cook. Frederick J. Beecher, Porter. Nolan F. Church, Porter. George J. Hall, Chief Engineer. Edward F. Bindum, Assistant Engineer. Thomas E. Edwards, Second Assistant Engineer. Carl A. Pecall, Watchman. Mark A. Thomas, Maintenance. Paul M. Ripa, Maintenance. Russell G. Haskell, Second Assistant Engineer. Oliver J. Champeau, Third Assistant Engineer. Blaine H. Wilhelm, Oiler. Ralph G. Walton, Oiler. Thomas Benson, Oiler. Joseph W. Mays, Maintenance. Gordon F. McClellan, Wiper. All mariners lost at sea.
Thank you, Kyle. And now I'll reintroduce Mike and Kathy of the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute.
It's such an honor to be asked to play this song, Gordon's song, for you. When Gordon found out many years ago that I was doing this, after a concert, he said, "Well, I understand you're a pinch hitter now." I said, "Yeah, I'm a pinch hitter playing your song." Bruce Lynn found out about that, and then tonight he asked me to say a prayer when Father Bob couldn't be here. Yeah, that's okay. We have George Krotchik on keyboards playing with us tonight, and Matt Wolfile on drums and percussion, Jim Stevens on bass, and Michael Freimuth on lead guitar, all playing with us virtually tonight. But I'd like to introduce Kathy Asseltine, who's going to play live with us tonight on pedal steel guitar. So here we go with our song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I did find out that Gordon Lightfoot didn't make it to the pearly gates. And when he got there, St. Peter was waiting for him at the podium. And he said, "Come on in, Gordon, bring your guitar. We've got 29 men up here who are pretty excited about meeting you."
Yes.
The sun from the shore of the big lake they call WWMT. The lake is and never gives up when the skies of November turn green. With a load of iron ore 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald WWMT. That good ship and true was a home to be true when the gales of November came early. The ship was pride, the American side, coming back from Sumner, Wisconsin. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most. It was captain well seasoned. Some terms for the company still burns. They left the lead loaded for Cleveland. Later that night, the ships fell back. It made the north when they met behind. The wires made a tiny tail sound, and the wave broke over the bay. And at the day, as the captain came to, was the winter of November comes. The dawn came late and the brightness had to wait, when the gales of November made budget. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain, in the face of a hurricane west wind. When summertime came, the old crew came on deck, saying, "Fellas, it's true, Rob, at 7 p.m. it grew dark instead. He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know you." The captain waited, we had fun, and the ship's crew was in bed. And later that night, when his lights were out of sight, he heard the Edmund
The searchers all say they have made Whitefish Bay. They put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up, they might have capsized, they may have broke deep into the water. And all that remains are the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and daughters. Lake Huron grows. Old Michigan seems like a young man's dream. The islands and days are for sportsmen. Farther below Lake Ontario takes it with Lake Erie in December. And the islanders all know with the gales of November, remember. In a rustic old hall, in the maritime sailors' cathedral, the church bell chimed till it rang 29 times. Great bell, Edmund Fitzgerald. That's it. Up the big lake they call it Tuesday. So there they say, what the gales of November come
Thank you, Mike and Kathy. Very well done. And I think this is the first year Kathy has played with the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute, I think. A very nice addition, I would say. And Mike, I think you've played for this event at least 11 years at this point? I'm going into my 15th, so 14 years at this point. There we go. All right, well, let's give them a round of applause one more time. You know, Mike and the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute and Kathy now they do tour throughout different parts of the country, playing Gordon Lightfoot's music. And we did have one year. It was one of the very first years that Mike and the group were playing that a young lady approached Mike. Mike and I were standing in the lobby here, and a young lady approached him and asked for his autograph. And but I don't think she was expecting Mike Fornes as far as the autograph. She was absolutely expecting Gordon Lightfoot because she believed that he was more Gordon Lightfoot. And Mike, I think that's happened more than once. As Mike nods, yes, absolutely. So I'd say that's a compliment. So thank you both again, and the rest of the group that we're playing virtually for us tonight. Okay, so our final minutes of this year's memorial to the Edmund Fitzgerald and the crew of 29. A couple things we like to do when we round this out. First, tomorrow's Veterans Day. So if we have any active duty or veterans of any of the branches of service, armed forces, if you would like to please stand. give them a round of applause. Thank you all for your service. And some of the last few things that I would add here, I would like to recognize the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society staff that worked really hard and helped to put this whole event together, one of which you're not going to see because he's the man behind the curtain. But the live stream aspect of it, and everybody who's viewing this at home at this point, we can thank Corey Adkins and his wife Stephanie for helping this to all work. So let's give the staff here, and have them all stand, by the way. Shipwreck Society staff stand. Sarah Wildy does a wonderful job of getting everybody to their seats, and Kelly and Cheryl, and we've just got a good crew. We're very fortunate to have the staff that we have here. So, and with that, we do have some snacks at the back of the building. Sarah, if you look back in the direction I'm looking right now, Sarah Jocks will wave. There we go. And we have cookies and coffee and water back there. And we have one final aspect of this event. So again, keep Father Bob and his wife Dawn in your prayers that couldn't be here tonight. But once again, I will introduce Mike Forens for the benediction.
We pray. Eternal God, we ask your continued benediction upon those whom we have honored this night, who have stood their last watch, completed their final voyage, finished their labors, dropped anchor in the harbor of tranquility, and now rest in the presence of God forever. May their souls and the souls of all faithful departed rest in peace. Amen.
Thank you, Mike. Or maybe we say Father Mike. Right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us for this event. The last few minutes, I will talk a little bit about what we plan to do next year. Everybody's aware that next year is the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And we have had a lot of questions from a lot of people as to what are we planning. And as of right now, we really wanted to focus on this event and not look at the 50th just yet. But we do have some plans to have a public event that will be taking place outdoors, that will be during the day here on November the 10th, 2025. We will also do the event like we do every year. That we do here, like we're doing now. This event will take place as well, and this will be for the family members and others that have a connection to the ship. So we will still do this event, but we will do a public event. I don't know if any of you have been out to Split Rock, that lighthouse out there on the other end of the lake. Have you been out there? Has anybody been out there for their Fitzgerald event that they do? So that was outdoors. How did it go? It was freezing. So a good friend of mine, Hayes Scriven, is the director out there, and he shared a video of him speaking at that event. And this was, I think, it wasn't last year, it might have been 2 years ago, but he just he was standing just inside of a door of a building, if I remember correctly. And so he was just out of the wind as it was blowing. But, you know, if we think we get dramatic weather here at Whitefish Point, they absolutely get dramatic weather out at Split Rock as well. But we're going to experiment with doing an event during the day, because we do know that the number of people who have already been reaching out to us, even this year, that are just people that are interested in what we might do. These are not, in some cases they were media, but mostly just everyday people wanted to know what we had planned. And there's going to be a few other things that we'll be developing that are already starting at this point. So what I would recommend is if you are interested in some of these events or other things that we might be doing, keep an eye on our website, that's shipwreckmuseum.com, and of course our social media. Corey will be putting different announcements and different ideas of things that we're going to be working on. So with that, Thank you all again for joining us. Everybody that's tuning in via the live stream, we're glad that you were able to join us as well. Have a safe drive home, everybody, and some of you who came from even further distances have safe flights home. And everybody have a great evening. We'll see you next year. And don't forget the cookies in the back.